I'm very excited and happy to hand over to Gary Fleming. So let's give him a big round of applause.
Okay, this talk is called Estimates in Complexity, a Tale in 42.5 minutes. So my name is Gary Fleming. I am a former Agile coach. I went back to engineering management a couple of years ago, but I still come to a lot of conferences like this one. I will take questions at the end. I already know what your first question is. Don't ask me how, but I know. But I've got a question for you, and you've got a couple of minutes to think about it. I'll come back to it in about 2 or 3 minutes. Who thinks I'm going to get this talk done in 42.5 minutes? Who believes the title? Just have a think about it. Have a think. So, need to put up a disclaimer. My employers have rightly distanced themselves from my views. That's fair. I accept that. I accept that. And the truth is, most of them didn't happen. Most of the stuff in this talk did not happen at my current employers, so it'd be unfair to lump any of them. So, with that done, let's talk about estimation. So, why do we estimate? There's lots of different reasons why we estimate. Sometimes we are just trying to figure out how long something will take, how much more we can cram into a sprint. It's usually cramming rather than anything sensible. Given 2 pieces of work, which should we choose first? You know, how do we make a reasonable decision about stuff? It can be about building our understanding. It can be about predictability. And I would say, to be honest, most of those things are about predictability. We estimate because we're looking for some kind of predictability. We want better certainty about the future. We want to know when we'll get value. We want to know when. We want to know what. Like, we want something that we can grasp onto because, you know, it makes us feel safe at night. Likewise, there's lots of different things we can estimate. We can estimate effort or time, which are very slightly different concepts. We can estimate things like cost. How much will it cost us to do this? And conversely, how much value do we think we're going to get from it? We can look at complexity and understanding. And I would argue that the value in the things we're estimating get higher the further down that list you go. Effort, elapsed time are actually quite low value. And that is actually a big part of what this talk is about. Time is not that useful. So, that's what we should do. That should be why we do things. That should be what we estimate. But what do we really do? Most of the teams that I've worked with over the years don't estimate really anything useful. And they don't do it for themselves. Most of the time, they're estimating because someone asks them to. Someone external to the team said, I need an estimate. It could be a process. It could be a JIRA scorecard. It could be a manager, some program manager. External factors drive the estimates, not the teams themselves. They estimate purely in terms of effort. Talking about cost or value is actually pretty rare. I'm sure some of you do some of that stuff, but I think you'll also agree that most estimates are in time. And that drives a kind of ritualistic approach to estimation. People will turn up and do the thing, yeah, but they won't actually value it. They won't then go and drive any decisions out of it. The most likely thing to happen to almost every estimate that I have ever seen is it gets recorded. It goes in a little form in JIRA. We fill it in that little box because we have to, and then it's forgotten forever. Until someone comes back and says, if you mess it up, somebody comes back and says, you said this would be 3 days, and it's now day 5. What's happening? What's happened is we never cared about the thing in the first place. We were never bought into the estimate. We never used it to drive any decisions. It was not our estimate. And I think it's really important to understand that every estimate that we have has to drive a decision. If you're not estimating and then using it to make some sort of decision, whether it's we're going to do A or B, we're going to pull this thing into the sprint, we are going to make something different, then the estimation is, by no other measure, it is waste. It's just waste. And we see a whole bunch of anti-patterns emerge from this kind of estimation process. You know, we see people who do massive upfront scope. So they will try to estimate everything up front so that they can, you know, get that part of the process out the way. They'll estimate in real units of time rather than kind of fuzzier units of time, which we'll get in a little bit later, or they'll use a proxy like story points, and story points are a proxy for time in pretty much every usage. I'm not saying they should be, they should not be, but that's how they tend to actually be used. We also tend to do that estimation when we have least knowledge, like we estimate up front when we don't really know what we're doing. And then we record all of that in Jira and never ever revisit it. So my first and best piece of advice that I'm going to keep coming back to about that kind of estimation is just don't. If that's what you're doing, just don't. Now, I know you're thinking, but I need to fill in that little square in Jira. Good news, you can just put in a 3. You're welcome. It can be 3 story points, it can be 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months. You pick the 3, but it should just be 3, right? I've saved you a lot of time. You're welcome. Even if you do engage with your estimation a bit more than that, I'm going to argue that just focusing in time, and largely when I'm talking about estimation through this talk, I do mean time, is not really that useful. There are other techniques that you can use, should use, that are better. And it's probably worth saying that this is based on experience. I don't estimate. The teams that I work with are highly effective. They have very successful products in their context, and context is important, and they don't estimate anything, ever. Estimation is waste, and we don't need it. We have better techniques that we can use that mean we don't have to estimate. Back to the question at the start, 42.5 minutes. So I've been speaking for a couple of minutes. Who thinks I'm going to finish this talk 42.5 minutes after I started? Show of hands. Oh, you're pessimistic. That's the lowest I've seen. Cool. I mean, I could stop talking right now, and I would have finished in 42.5 minutes. But would I have delivered anything valuable? Well, probably not. I mean, the just don't. I could finish there. But I don't think I'd be invited back if I did a 10-minute talk, right? That's really not how conference talks work. So, do you think I'll finish within a few minutes of the title's implicit deadline? Yeah. So, some of you do. Some of you do. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about deadlines. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the idea of deadlines. They are a big part of what drive estimates. You know, somebody has been given an estimate, so now they're asked, well, look at all the work and see whether you can make the date, which I don't know about you, that seems a little bit backwards to me. And most of the time, deadlines are self-imposed, right? They don't really mean anything. There are very few real deadlines. They often come from, you know, the high-paid person's opinion. Your boss's boss's boss says it must be done by this date for arbitrary reasons. It can be about just wild guesses. Somebody somewhere just decided that's the deadline. Stick to it, which happens more than you would think. Or it can be derived from a pseudo-estimation process like story points. We will come back to story points later. I am not a fan. That's a little spoiler for you. There are real deadlines in the world. Real deadlines really do exist. So if you are building an app for a sporting event, Wimbledon are not going to delay their tennis for you. Like that's not a real thing. If you've got something that you need to do for HMRC, they're not moving the tax deadline. Right? Regulation matters. Like there's plenty of things that are real deadlines. And if you're doing something physical, like manufacturing, lead times dictate most of the timeline for your project. Like your software can be developed much faster than your physical things for a bunch of reasons. So real deadlines do kind of exist. I would argue that almost none of you have ever had a real deadline. Yeah, lots of nods. I've had 2 in my life, and I'm not going to talk about them specifically, but if you want to hear about them, I can tell you later. Most deadlines aren't real. There are a few real consequences for missing a deadline. The consequences there are usually social. They're usually interpersonal. And that doesn't mean that you can ignore them. As much as deadlines are made up and silly, most of the time, they have consequences. They do actually matter. We'll talk about that in a second. But let's talk about this for a second. Do you think I have a deadline to finish this talk? A few nods. What's my deadline? What? 42 and a half minutes? Well, no, it's not. I have a 45 minute slot. I've got 2.5 minutes of slack. What happens if I don't finish in 42 and a half minutes or 45 minutes? What happens? You all leave. Yeah, that's true. Like, most of you will eventually leave. Now, I'm backing onto your breaks. I might get a minute or two of grace if I'm, on a roll and I'm entertaining you. But at some point, you're going to go and leave and get coffee, because honestly, coffee's better than the talk, isn't it? I know my place. I'm okay with that. The next session will start eventually. There is a deadline, whether implicit or not, right? There is this point in time where I have to get off the stage. So I do have a kind of real deadline. It's fuzzy, but it's real. And you have deadlines in your work, whether you believe it or not, whether you're in the freeze place to do stuff. You often have deadlines because someone has an expectation of you. Your manager, your manager's manager, your customers, they have expectations of you. It doesn't matter whether you agree to those expectations. If you don't meet those expectations, there are social consequences. And that's not fair, but it is true. But it's social consequences in two different directions, right? You will be seen as lesser at your work for not meeting those deadlines, but you also think less of the people imposing them because you never agreed to them. Deadlines are a two-way street. So J.B. Rainsberger says this: when a software delivery group is forced to estimate tasks, this tends to trap them in an environment of obligation without responsibility. And often the person demanding these estimates find themselves in the very same trap. Estimates harm us all. Deadlines can harm us all. Anyway, 42.5 minutes. So we've established that there are constraints, right? I am going to have to leave at some point. Sophie is looking at me sharply every time I say, even indicate I might not leave in time. That's okay. But why do you think I'll finish in time? Like, what is that based on? Is it just that I put it in the title? No? Well, here's a few reasons that you might think that I'm not going to go over in the time. I have never gone over a talk time, even by a few seconds. Never. Now, you can choose to believe me or not. We can choose to exercise some of that social trust or not. Like, that's entirely up to you. Maybe you've seen me talk before. I spoke here last year about product strategy, roadmaps, I think. Maybe that was true in your experience. Like, I think I finished that talk in 42 minutes, coincidentally. And maybe you've been to this event before and you just know that people finish in time, or that if they don't, they'll be walked out by the room moderators who are on the ball, which is not true of every conference. So I think probably your best bet here for judging whether I'll get off stage in time is repeatable knowledge. You know, based on seeing me, that I'm going to leave, or you know based on the conference that I'm going to leave, right? Knowledge and experience actually matters. That is the true source of any understanding. Having done something before is the best judge of knowing what's going to happen next. And there's a kind of complexity that you can derive from experience. So Les Keel's talked in the past about a kind of experience and what it means in terms of how we should act. You can think of these as kind of broad categories on a spectrum. So there's things that we've done before, in which case, like, we can just go and do it again. There are plenty of things that we've done something very similar to in software, so we know that we can repeat it. Or that someone in the team has done it before, so you can just go to the next desk or jump in a Zoom call with one of your colleagues and know that it's not going to take that long to figure out how to solve this next problem because it's very similar to what you've done before. Then there's things that have happened that someone in the company has done before. Now, that's not exactly the same thing, and it really depends on your company. But if someone in the company has done it before, you know it can be done, you know it can likely be done in your context, then you probably just need to do some cross-training to figure out how you are going to do it in the future. Now, that adds time lapse. You yourself do not have the experience to go and do estimation, but you can start to figure some stuff out about how long it's going to take. Then there's stuff that you think someone in the world has done before, but not in your context, not in your company, or that no one has done before, at least as far as you know. Yeah? That makes it really quite difficult to do any sort of estimation. If you've never seen it done before, if you don't know if it's possible, how would you possibly estimate it? Really all you can do is try to solve a simpler problem. Like try to build a time-boxed experiment where you carve off part of the thing that you don't know how to do a very quick spike through it, time box it so you're never going to run off for weeks and weeks and weeks, and then say, yeah, okay, we've learned enough to know that we can now do this. or that we need to experiment more, and you can make a kind of assessment on whether you want to do that or you want to stop. You need understanding and experience to really get to any meaningful estimate. Speaking of which, so I've done this talk 2 times before. I did it at Lean Agile Glasgow, a local meetup to where I live, and I ran it short. I ran it intentionally short so that I could get some feedback, I could incorporate that in the talk, see the stuff that was missing and fold that in. That talk ran at 39 minutes and 18 seconds. That's what the stopwatch is for. I then changed about 60% of the slides. I changed 60% of the slides for Agile in the City Bristol last week. And I kind of guess, I was really actually worried about running over. I thought it was going to take about 45 to 46 minutes. It took 39 minutes, it got shorter. I have no idea how. Like, genuinely, I have no idea. I added a bunch of stuff. I took some stuff out, but it got shorter. What I'm really saying is, I'm bad at estimates, and I don't want you to do it, so I look bad. That's really the real trick of this talk. So for this talk, I changed about 15% of the talk, and it was almost all additions. I added about 15% more material. I sliced it a tiny, tiny little bit. 15% of 39 is about 5 minutes, so I should be pretty much dead on 45 minutes. Who thinks I'm going to take 42.5 minutes? Still, show hands. Less confidence, good. I mean, as much as I don't know how long the extra additions are going to take, because I finished writing this talk 5 minutes before we walked in, like, there's clearly a structure. I have thought about this. Like, the slides are an indicator that I have thought this through. Like, clear structure up there. It took time and effort to plan that, including this bit here where I say it took time and planning to write it. That is in the notes. They're right here. Now, I know, like, 1 or 2 you're probably thinking the talk's getting a bit too meta. Like, the talk is actually about the talk, and I'm not sure that's the case. Right? I think we can go much further. So, I mean, I actually think talks are a good metaphor for software delivery, because I had to, or bad software delivery, because I had to submit the talk title and the abstract and the learning outcomes 5 months ago. 5, 6 months ago, December sort of time frame was when the submissions for this conference went in. That's when I wrote the talk title. That's when I wrote the abstracts, and that's when I wrote the learning outcomes. So I had to decide a huge amount of my product up front. How do you avoid upfront estimation? I mean, how do you make something that is changeable? Because I've fallen into this trap, right? I scoped up front, I gave an estimate when I had the least knowledge, and I recorded it somewhere. I recorded it literally in the title. And you might remember this from the anti-parents before. Yeah, this was not a good idea. So, I wrote the title 5 months before I wrote the talk, because I thought the stopwatch idea was good. Like, I thought that was clever. I regret it a lot now. I knew the subject. I knew some of the things that were going to go into it, because they were in the learning outcomes, but I didn't know what would make the final cut, and I certainly didn't know it was going to take 42.5 minutes. So, really no knowledge. So how did I pick 42.5 minutes, right? Well, I could have picked 45 minutes, because that's the length of the slot. But it's too round and it's too vague. I don't trust that as an estimate, right? I don't trust it. It's the length of the slot. It just means it's going to kind of take up the length of time of the slot. It doesn't have any sort of real precision. I could go on the other way and made it even more precise and said 42 minutes, 33 seconds, and none of you would believe me. Right? If I called it this, you would not think, you would assume that I was saying I was going to finish dead on that moment, and there's clearly no way that's going to happen. I mean, if I do, that's going to be a miracle. It's going to be entirely coincidental. I don't think that's where we're going to end up. And I can take it to an extreme, right? Like, clearly that's far too precise. That's far, far too precise. 42.5 minutes is vague. It's like it gives you a feel for how long the thing's going to take. You know, roughly it's slot length. You get a shape, you get the kind of shape, you get this sort of blurry picture. You know roughly what you're going to get, which I would argue is good for an estimate. Increasing precision has negative effects. It decreases trust. Like, if you say you're really, really precise, no one's going to believe you. And I can demonstrate that pretty easily. If I say I'm going to deliver a piece of software on the 11th of December at 11:52 a.m., that's pretty precise. Who thinks, if a developer came to you and said that, would you believe them? No. Like, that is absurd. If they said late November, early December, you'd be like, yeah, sure. Unless I know something better. I don't know. Yeah? Overly precise estimates in this context decrease trust. Using flat numerical number systems decrease trust. You want things to be big. You do. Which, because if you don't use flat numerical number systems, if you don't introduce error bounds of some sort, it leads to all sorts of weird behavior, weird misunderstandings, and things that don't quite work. Story points. Show of hands, who's using story points? I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't like them. I am not a big fan of story points, and I'm not criticizing you for using them. I know there's a whole bunch of reasons why people do use them. I'm going to try to convince you they're a mistake, though. There was a silly number of nods. Like, everyone already knows their mistakes, and you're still doing it. All right. I mean, one thing that's worth knowing about story points is there is no team-level agile methodology that promotes them. Not one. Not a single team-level methodology says use story points. That should tell you quite a lot. Scrum, you might think, does. It does not. It does not mention story points anywhere in the Scrum Guide. It says, Scrum is founded on empiricism and lean thinking. Empiricism asserts that knowledge comes from experience, remember that word from earlier, and making decisions based on what is observed. Lean thinking reduces waste and focuses on the essentials. So, clearly Scrum uses empiricism. It's saying, use data that you have from the past to inform the future. It's saying take a data-driven approach, not a guess-driven approach. It's saying look forward. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of Scrum. I think there are better ways of working. I think it'd be fine to start. But even ardent Scrum teams should visualize, inspect, and adapt using data to get better. Right? That's what we should do. I think we can do that in lots of different ways. At least one person who's seen this talk says, SAFe promotes story points. I don't think that's a team-level framework. And I'll leave it up to you to say whether it's an agile framework. I'm not getting in that fight again. So, I mean, what's really the problem with story points? They look like numbers, right? That's really the biggest issue. They look like numbers, and they're not supposed to be treated like numbers. So when they were originally created, they were meant to be relatively sized. Something that's 3, it's smaller than 7. That was really all it is. It's big. They were supposed to be big, blurry numbers that are just kind of vague and relative to each other. That's not how they're used, though. They're almost always used as something precise. They're almost always used and converted into time. Almost everywhere. I mean, you get people who are very, very special about that and who will take a direct unit of time. They'll say that 2 story points is a day. I've worked in orgs who have done that. At which point, why don't you just use days? Like, who are you kidding? Like, story points are not magical sprinkled fairy dust that turn your days into real things. It's not how any of this works. So people have stopped seeing that error bound is implicit in a story point, and for that reason, they've kind of fallen out of favor. The interesting thing is story points actually come from an older unit called gummy bears. I'm not going to get into gummy bears deeply here, but gummy bears were different sizes of gummy bears. Genuinely relatively sized, like small, medium, large. In most uses, story points get involved in addition, and that is mad. Like, you cannot add things up. 2 plus 2 plus 2 story points is not the same as 8 story points. It never will be. These are wildly different experiences. Generally, 2 is something small, well-bound, something that you know how to do, you know how to tackle it. You can cut off where you think the level of I don't quite know this is. I'm going to just use, for an example's sake, 8. That's where I'm starting to say, this is kind of big, it's kind of fuzzy, I don't know how quite to do this. That thing is a different experience. You can make that 13, a 21, whatever. I'm not going there today. But you're saying that this is large and complex and less well understood than this thing over here. You can't add up 4 well-known experiences and say, well, that's roughly the same as a well-known experience. Yet that is something that we do all the time. All the time. They're different experiences and they have different predictability. I can usually tell you how well you'll do using past data on small experiences. I can't really do that too well when things get bigger. And that leads us to velocity, right? Velocity is that kind of lack of coherence taken to an extreme, like a huge extreme. The fact that you think you can add a bunch of story points together, a bunch of different experiences together, and get some sort of information makes absolutely zero sense. It really does. I mean, the only thing you can really do with velocity is saying, I don't want to go above this amount. And even then, there are better ways. So I've been knocking a lot of estimation, right? That's really what we've been doing for the last 20, actually I don't know how long, 30 minutes, however long. Let's talk about a better approach to estimation. It can't all be negative. It can't just be you're silly for using story points. It has to take us somewhere. We have to learn. Those are in the learning outcomes. Like I said, most estimates are waste and you don't really need them. And you need to understand the question you're actually trying to answer. So first I would say start there. Make sure you understand the question and then find an estimation technique appropriate for whatever it is you're trying to find out. Now I can't go over understanding complexity, value, cost. I don't have the time to do that. That's like a full day thing. So let's focus on time, the thing that I said I'm not keen on before. So let's figure out ways of being predictable in time. One better approach is slicing. And slicing for me is the art of making 8s into 2s. It's taking these big chunky things that we don't understand and turn them into small things that we do understand. So I'm going to use an example to demonstrate, and it's going to shock you what the example is. It's this talk, right? Because we've not been quite meta enough. So when I was trying to figure out how to turn this into an agile way of working, given I'd done all that estimation up front, basically what I wrote down were the big themes I wanted in the talk. What are the big things I actually want to talk about? So how estimates are used, deadlines, complexity, slicing, which is the part we're talking about just now, and probabilistic forecasting, which is coming up soon. I sliced all these big things in, and then I found one idea in each of those topics, literally one idea that I thought was key. Like, if I can't talk about anything else, what should I talk about? So for how estimates are used, I knew I had to talk about the dysfunctions because it is how the talk is set up to sell everything else at the end. Right? I can't not talk about the dysfunctions or else it doesn't work. So at that point, I just wrote all those small sections, and I've got an MVP. I mean, MVP probably ran at 15, 20 minutes, but I knew that if nothing else happened, I could walk on stage and I'm okay at this stuff. I could probably blabber through another 15, 20 minutes, tick the box for conference compliance, and deliver some value, right? So I sliced very small. I delivered lots of little parts and had value almost immediately. I'd gone from I have nothing to I'm fine. And I think that's genuinely how we should work, right? We should slice small and get value out there very quickly. And I mean, this is a form of prioritization as well. I've said, these are the things that are most valuable. I'm going to do them first, and then I'm going to layer other stuff in. And that's exactly what I did. So I went back to each of those sections and said, okay, let's pan out every single thing that I wanted to talk about in that section and just write down a bunch of subheadings and then look at it. What things are most important? What things are going to get most value? What things do you need to hear? So you might remember the bit I did earlier about misunderstandings. You don't, I sliced that out because it was not valuable. It was in the original notes for the talk, but I looked at it and I was like, it doesn't help me in a way that everything else does. And I know I can't fit everything in. So having gone through the entire thing, I started slicing out the stuff that was least valuable. And then I went through the talk and just added little bits the whole way through. And that's what you should do. Focus on the same thing. What are things that are absolutely essential to your work? What are the pillars? What is actually going to keep the thing together? What's going to give you the minimum valuable? Deliver that and just have it immediately. You can get it in the hands of customers, you can get feedback, you know whether you're going in the right direction or not. Prioritize everything that's left. Be brutal about this. Get rid of anything that's not important. Anything that you can delay, delay. If you don't need it next, don't worry about it, just delay it. In the process of actually doing the work, you also learn other new things that you hadn't realized you needed to do. Feel free to do the same thing. Feed them in, decide whether they're the next most important thing, and go from there. Flow then becomes a natural outcome. If you've got lots of small, evenly sized, well understood things, flow is a consequence. That is a good thing. You're delivering frequently and you're actually getting value from your customers. You almost always deliver value faster than that imaginary deadline, 3 months out when you are allegedly done the entire thing. You almost always deliver value faster, and you can prioritize with more information. You put your real work into the market, got feedback, you're doing the right thing. I'm arguing that slicing is better than time-based estimation. It helps you always be ready to go. It helps you always have deliverable. It's still going to be rough, right? It's still going to be hard to break things into small pieces. There are things that you don't quite know how to do, but that is how it is, right? There's always going to be things that you are left unknown, things that you don't know how big they are. So do what we said a bit earlier. If there are things that you haven't been able to slice down into, to look at them and prioritize them. Think about how you're going to experiment. Introduce a 2-day experiment to push that thing forward. How are you going to learn the information you need to do your work? So the stakeholders need dates. This is a question that comes up every single time I've done this talk or spoken about this area. They need dates. And that's normal, right? Of course they want dates. Why do they want dates? Anyone? Yeah, I mean, that's one of the big reasons of marketing. Assurance. That's a big reason. I mean, there are absolutely cases where it's about that long-lived physical thing we talked about at the end. Most of us actually don't have that, though. Like, that's not the case. Most of the time it's assurance. The reality is they don't trust you. But I know that sounds kind of harsh, but they don't. They don't know to trust you because every other software project I've ever been on delivers at the deadline. Because that's how everyone works. They work to the deadline. So they know that in 3 months they're going to get a thing. It might be the right thing. It might not be the right thing. It might be late. It might be missing features. They don't know. So slice. Give them an imaginary date. Tell them the 3 months thing. Whatever it is they're really looking to hear. And then ignore it. And I'm not saying don't deliver. I'm saying deliver fast. Deliver lots of slices to them frequently. And let them see that you're capable. Let them build trust. Trust is an outcome of what we do. Deliver this stuff frequently so that they trust you. Trust is an outcome of flow. Trust is an outcome of doing delivery. Trust is what matters here. And if you keep delivering, they will stop asking you about dates. Every time that I've worked in this way, no one asks about dates after a while because they know what you're capable of. They know that you can reprioritize, recontextualize, and move on. Let me re-emphasize that. Slicing is a mechanism for building trust while providing continuous value. That's what it's for. It's a trust mechanism so that dates don't matter. And dates don't matter. So this is roughly what my teams do. I said we don't estimate near the start, and we don't. What we do is set goals at the start of every iteration, every period of time. We try to figure out, what is the next thing we should go after. We'll look at the work and slice it. And we deliver frequently. The key to making this actually work is that we demo. So who here does like a sprint review kind of thing or reviews? Do you do it to real customers? Keep your hand up if you do it to real customers. Keep your hand up if those things are in production. Okay, you notice the hands all start to go down there? The key to doing a good sprint review is it's not imaginary things you're going to do in the future. It is not slideware. It is not PowerPoint. It's none of that. It's real things you delivered in the last 2 weeks. I don't mean things you imagine you're going to deliver. I mean things you actually did deliver into production so a customer could use it. Nothing else counts. That's how we work. We deliver real things. And the consequence of that is very, very simple. Our customers get used to seeing a continuous flow of value. We get really good at slicing so that we've got something to demo every 2 weeks. In the odd occasion where something goes big because there's a problem, we get to have a conversation about how we improve, how we slice better, how we make this actually work. You can always slice something valuable in 2 weeks. Okay. but you really, 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 really need dates, fine. I'll tell you how to do dates. This is how you do dates. Probabilistic forecasting, which should not be a shock. It was in 4 or 5 slides back when I said that I was going to do this later. So what you have to do is slice up your work the best you can. You want as many small things as you can so that you get predictability. Predictability and flow are consequences of slicing here. Let's say you're still bad at this and you're not good at slicing yet. Let's go back to those gummy bear buckets or t-shirt sizes. You're going to estimate stuff that is small, stuff that is medium, stuff that is large. These are implicitly bounded contexts, like not bounded contexts, ranged contexts, right? Like they're not a precise size. Small, medium, large are kind of fuzzy a little bit. You still want more of the small than of the large, but I'm just assuming you're not good at slicing yet. You then count up the number of pieces of work that you have in each category. So for small, we've got 5 here, for medium, we've got 2, and for large, we have 1. You still want more small. Now the fun part. You go and look at data. You look at the things you have actually delivered in the past that you said was small and see how long it actually took. In this context, I'm saying that almost all of my smalls took 1 or 2 days, mediums took 25 days, and larges took 48 days. You get this data from a real system. If you don't have real data because you're new, you can't do estimation. If you don't have experience doing something, you're going to really struggle to do any sort of probabilistic forecasting, and that's fine. You then need to have some process to turn this into a date, right? And that's what probabilistic forecasting is. You do what casinos and banks have been doing for years to do fuzzy math and ranges. You do a Monte Carlo simulation. So, let me explain this to you. For each thing in small, you get a computer to tell you whether it's a 1 or a 2 at random. So everyone gets a random 1 or a 2. So in this case, I've got 1, 1, 2, 1, 2. Yeah? For everything that's a medium, I get a number between 2 and 5. So in this case, it came out at 5 and 2. And for everything that's a large, I pick a number between 4 and 8, randomly. And the sum of those, in that error 1 column, the sum of those things is 20. Then you do it again. You notice the numbers in the right-hand column have changed. You do it again. And then you do it again, and again, and again, and again, and again. You do it 1,000 times. You keep doing it over and over again. I don't mean you do it, although I did used to do this as a workshop with dice, and I made people do it more than they were comfortable with. But you get a computer to do it. You get it to simulate the future based on actual data. And you get it to predict the future 1,000 times and get numbers out. And then you plot it in a chart. Now, I know you're thinking, we couldn't render a chart that high tech. I know. There are tools that will do this for you. If you do, this is only about 20 iterations, but if you do it, you can start to see a bell curve appear. You'll see a probabilistic curve appear. Now, it's not completely curvy here yet, because there's not enough data, but over time, you'll see it. And then based on that, you can make real decisions. You can say, well, I think there's a 50% chance we're going to finish in day 21. I mean, I don't like a flippy a coin for deciding when things are going to be needed if I have an actual deadline, so I'm not going to go for that. But if your boss turns up and says, are you able to deliver day 18? You can look at it and go, there's a 10% chance we're going to deliver on day 18, right? You can also say, if you want a 90% chance, that's day 23. And if you want a 100% chance, that's day 25. This is what data has told us. We have run the numbers, and we have good science behind us. And don't worry, you don't need to do any of this yourself. There are tools that do this for you. Actionable Agile is a great tool. It integrates with Jira. It can pull your past data from Jira and just do all this for you. It's excellent. There are other tools as well. Now, I know you're thinking, that seems like a lot of work, right? I've told you not to do any of this. Right? I was very clear from the start that you don't need estimates. You shouldn't do any of this. Only do this if you need it. But if you do need a date, and you can't build the trust, and you can't do any of that other stuff that is better, this is how you get good dates. This is how you get actual dates based on data. So, to summarize, most estimates are waste, so just don't do that. Your deadlines should be inspected. You should understand where they come from. You should understand the impact on trust. You should think about the experience that you have doing a thing. You should think about whether it's something you've done before, whether you've never done it before, what's going to happen there. You're going to slice for value. So slicing, we spent a decent amount of time talking about. Slicing is how you build trust, it's how you get outcomes, it's how you get flow, it's how you get delivery. I know no better way. And if you really, really, really badly need a date, use forecasting. Use real data. Do what the weather people do and do forecasting. Don't estimate. And with that, I'm done. Thank you.
So, lots of questions.
Now, right?
Let's kick it off. Here we go.
Cheers, Gary, thanks. I've been to one of your talks before where you talked about Kanban. You did it in Agile in the Bristol quite a few years ago.
Okay.
Can you talk a little bit about how, because you supported a lot of the Kanban metrics.
Yeah.
I like a lot of the Kanban metrics. Can you talk a little bit about how that might apply here?
It plays in much the same way. So the kind of interesting Kanban metrics are things around flow, like how well your system's flowing. But that flow is driven by slicing, right? If you've got different size things moving through a flow system, you're going to get absolutely no predictability. Like, it's really hard to measure that. So the way you get flow, the way you get good Kanban metrics like flow is slicing. It's by doing things like building MVPs so that when new things come in, you know that the cycle time and the lead time are going to be predictable. But these things very much support each other, because if you've got big lumpy things, it doesn't work.
So, Gary, what was the time on the clock? So, the $1,000,000
question that a few people shouted. So let me answer that, right? Because clearly that was going to be a big question. I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to tell you what the time on the clock was, because it doesn't matter, right? Did I deliver value? Yeah? Did you have a good conference talk? So what does it matter what time the clock was? Like, you're going to go for a break. I never breach my external constraints, right? Doesn't matter. The clock doesn't matter.
I'm trying to think how to phrase this. So program manager, I'm head of product, and I realistically need forecasts to be able to say, do I go down this route or not? Because if this is going to take me 9 months and it's not actually worth me spending tens of thousands of developer time on that, how does that align with like these recommendations? Because they're not made up dates. It's me agreeing to do work or not multi-million-pound decisions.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I would say like there's times where having 9 months of work planned out is useful, but it's very rare. Most of the time, you're better making a bet on what is the predicted value of this piece of work. Like, so focusing on value, focusing on cost, and cost and time are related because developer time is expensive. Try hiring a developer at the moment; it's costly. It does matter. But it's that versus what? Like, so you need to take a value cost basis on that versus other prospects, and it's more like at what point will you get value from it? If you're trying to estimate an entire process or program of work, you're usually lying to yourself. Like or at least getting something so fuzzy as to be not that useful. I'm saying, like, start a bunch of pilots, very short-term experiments to say, well, look, can we do a little bit of this? Do we know how to do it? And committing to a small amount of time at once. Like, so building flow systems into your program. That can work. You're not convinced, I can see that, but let's talk afterwards.
Yeah. Any more questions? Any more questions? Okay, we've got one down here. Great. I think this will be the last question, then everyone can speak to Gary in the break as well.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak in the break, or if you see me around.
I'm guaranteed to empty the room with this question. So very interested to agree with a lot of what you're saying. I think one of the challenges you hit is with finance, where maybe some of the things you're building need to be capitalised, or R&D and so on. If you're running a team like that, if you're not doing perhaps story pointing, how are they going to work out what percentage of the costs they should put on the balance sheet for an asset?
I mean, how much are story points actually helping with that? I mean, story points, how accurate do your story points end up being?
So I'm keen on getting rid of timesheets. It's a personal pet thing of mine because I think they're horrible for people.
I don't have timesheets either.
So I've been hypothesizing with my finance department. You can just say you've got a team, they're running for a year. These epics were capitalizable. Just add up how many story points the team did against those. It's a percentage of their story points for the year. Can you use that as a proxy? But if you don't have story points and you don't have something in Jira to say how much effort was spent on that particular thing, it's harder.
So I get where you're going. I mean, but I don't think story points get you that in the first place. The story points are an imaginary thing that are can proxy that. So just pin some other, if you really need it, just pin some other imaginary thing, right? I mean, 3 is as good a number as any story point. And I mean that genuinely. I'm only half joking. Because the story points don't mean anything in the first
Yeah.
place.
So if you're not using story points, how do you deliver that outcome to the finance team to say this is the amount of effort, therefore money we spent on this thing?
I would say switch what you're doing. Like switch to using like long-lived flow-based teams. You're saying that this team is going to exist. The team are going to be paid. They're going to be working on something. Finance are going to have to pay the money for this team. It's going to be a roughly fixed size. We think we're going to go after this product. We think we're going to work in these things, but we might end up changing as we learn. Like finance the team anyway. Long-lived flow-based teams are preferable to finance mechanics that are made up anyway.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Well, loads of great questions, and thank you so much, Gary. And enjoy your break, everyone. We'll be back in 15 minutes.